Thank you, Mr. Presidente Moreno. Thank you, former Presidents Macri, Hurtado, Luis Pastrana, and our Secretary General of the OAS. And thank you all in this meeting of artistic, academic, meeting politicians, journalists from the Latin American world. Thank you all for your presence. Now, I'd like to offer some conclusions about the panel Democracy and Dictatorships of the Organized Crime. And four great speakers have spoken before me. They are journalists, investigators, academics, professors that, as you have heard in their talks, are more dedicated in the technique of the investigation of organized crime vis-a-vis the politics than to politics itself. They are not politicians. We have heard four talks, and we have seen that beyond our estimates or personal opinions or considerations, yes, there is organized crime in Latin America. Let me put this into context. In 1999, in the Americas, there was only one dictatorship in Cuba, Fidel Castro, in his periodo especial, special period. And that very year, Hugo Chavez arrived to the government and rescued that dictatorship, money, oil. And that was the very first populist project, the so-called Bolivarianism, the socialism of the 21st century, indicated as dictatorships in the book of former President Hurtado. The dictatorships of the 21st century, the Castro-Chavism, is Castrism with the money from Chavez and Venezuela. Chavez is dead. We might be speaking today of a Chavez Castrism, but this is a Castro Chavism because Chavez gave the capital to rescue a process that was already dead. Because we expected 21st century to be the century of democracy. In the 90s, we didn't have the democratic charter that was signed in September in Lima. Instead of having in the 21st century only democracy and to end up the dictatorship in Cuba, we had until 5 dictatorships at the same time. Cuba, Venezuela, Bolivia, Nicaragua, and Korea for over 10 years. And we have 2 para-dictatorial countries, Argentina and Mexico, and they play all the foreign policy supporting the Castro-Chavez dictatorships in this century. This is just the historic context. Now let's go to concepts. Politics and organized crime. 2 different things. Politics is a public service. Fundamentally depending on vote, investigations, and accountability. It is temporary. Politics has to do with the function of serving with transparency in the state of law, rotation of power, and it has to do essentially with the concept of free public, and that's where some key elements of democracy come from, described on the 3rd article of the Democratic Charter: respect of human rights, individual liberties, independence of branches, free elections, and a free political organization. And then we have the concept of crime, organized crime, that is outside the law. It's the rupture of violation of law according to some types established in the criminal code. And organized crime is the concept of an organization to commit a crime that is defined by the Palermo Convention and ratified by all the Latin American countries, including Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Bolivia, Argentina, and all the countries of the region, setting up that when more than 4 people are together to commit a crime that is punished by law with more than 4 years, is a crime classified as international organized crime. All the speakers have said before, you know that Cuban dictatorship is a process that started as a political process, but soon after that started invading, organizing guerrillas, invasions back in the 60s, Che Guevara dead in Bolivia, urban rural guerrillas in the 80s linked with the trafficking relationships with Roberto Sares and Pablo Escobar, with the Castros, ended up with the shooting of General Ochoa, and they count down after the Berlin Wall and the Soviet Union and his link with Chavez in 99. So in Venezuela they have their main platform. Venezuela is their reproduction. They call it Cubazuela. Some experts from those countries qualify that as that. And then Nicaragua, Evo Morales reaches the presidency in 2006. They constitute this plurinational state. They finished all the elements of democracy, and Correa does his thing in Ecuador. Now, in the context of the forum defending democracy, we have to ask ourselves, what are democracies doing to face this? They are quiet, but democracies make statements and speeches. That's why this forum is not going to end up with a declaration or a statement. We might have a proposal, because statements and good intentions, we have more of that in. We have Chile, Colombia, Paraguay with guerrillas, FARC with this unarmed and a political arms, and all those countries are under a threat. And that's where the phenomenon of Ecuador stands out. The fact of a president where we didn't expect a recovery of a political democratic process. There was a clear process of transition to democracy, which we haven't seen in Venezuela with Guaido, or in Bolivia with Yanes, who is now in prison for breaking their or violating her human rights, but because she didn't apply the state of law because of their own mistakes. So Ecuador has been able to make this transition, offering a model, an example to the hemisphere and the world. Not only those statements or declarations, there are some intentions of the Group of Lima, which is for me a failure. The background of the application of the Inter-American Charter, starting with Venezuela, with Almagro's report that should be institutionalized. They analyzed the situation of Venezuela vis-a-vis the Charter, and they say that it is a dictatorship. They insist in that. There are several reports on that. The U.S. and the EU applies sanctions, and the U.S. applies the Palermo Convention, and that's why today, taking into consideration trials in Florida and in New York, there is warrants of a capture or arrest against Nicolás Maduro, against Tarek Hamez for 15 million for his capture. And this is not U.S. right. This is the Palermo Convention applied in a member that ratified that convention, with the background that U.S. applied the same convention in the FIFA Gate, as they call it. To wrap up, what should we do? In my opinion, I'd like to suggest the political leaders, people with power, with option of power, sitting here on this table and in the audience, and people that will hear us later. First, we have to identify the attacker. Well, we have to qualify that attacker. Is it difficult to say that Cuba is the leader of the international organized crime in the Americas? Is it so hard to say that? Why does the Colombian president, the Chilean president, the president of Uruguay or Bolivia do not say that? The name is Cuba in any strategy. The leader, that government that does not identify the enemy, has his or her strategy failed. As long as we don't identify Cuba as the leader of the international organized crime, we'll be saying truth in half. And these are big lies, and people need leadership from their leaders, not lies. Another suggestion, another proposal is to apply the laws, existing laws. Democracy has a mechanism to defend itself. We have the Inter-American Democratic Charter, as was shown by Almagro in the case of Venezuela. we could do the same in Bolivia. There are political prisoners, political exiles, and I think that they will be doing that. In the case of Nicaragua, they have said that. In the case of Cuba, it is very clear. I remember that statement, dictadura jinetera. We have to apply the Palermo Convention, and we have to tell the people that we are facing dictatorships that are not political. It's international organized crime, and it is led by Cuba with all their partners outside the continent, including China, Iran, Russia, you name it. It's always been like that because there is no Soviet Union with a main platform in Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Bolivia. The support of countries that are still democracy, but with a growing authoritarianism. Dictatorship is something, and authoritarianism, we can see that in Mexico and Argentina. Thank you so much.